in Everyday Wisdom, this little book of quotes, my favorite quote in there is this whole idea that if you really want to improve the quality of your relationships, whatever you pay to get in here tonight, just this one little sentence will really dramatically alter your relationships. And I'm not just talking about the person that you live with. I'm talking about people that you meet on the street, people that you work with, people that wait on you in restaurants, whomever they are. When you have the choice, and you always do, to be right or to be kind, just pick kind. It's a whole new paradigm. I no longer have to be right. Whew. Now there is a shift in awareness that will lead you to higher consciousness. Someone says, you really are an asshole. And you say, I appreciate you pointing that out. You know, I really do behave like a jerk a lot. And having someone to point it out to me really probably will help me to transcend that. It's very nice of you. The subtitle of my new book is called Making the Decision to Be Free. Making the decision to be free. Now, freedom, the best definition I ever heard of freedom was offered by Florinda Donner in a wonderful book called Being in Dreaming. And Florinda Donner defined it this way. She said, freedom is the absolute lack of concern about yourself. Now that's freedom. When I was walking with Marianne Williamson in Melbourne, Australia, just a few months ago, we toured Australia, speaking down there. And we went for a walk one day. My oldest daughter, was babysitting her little girl, Emma. And we went for a walk for about 2-3 hours, just talking about the tour and what we were going to do on the programs and all of that. And she said to me, out of nowhere, she said, come on, Wayne. She said, tell me, do you have any secret desires? Just like... Now, there was a time when someone asked me that question in a park, you know, a woman, I would have come up with sort of a crass remark. But I said, yes, I do have secret desires. She said, what is it? I said, I would like to disappear and still be here. And I remember reading in some of Castaneda's later works saying that freedom is really a disappearing act. It's like you have to learn how to disappear your ego. And the absolute lack of concern about yourself and how things affect you and how self-absorbed you are and how important you are and their need to be right all the time and all of that. This is all stuff that is part of a paradigm that we have been taught because we believe in this, ego, which stands for edging God out. Our ego is the part of us that is our false self. And I say that without qualification. It is the part of us that would have us believe that we are separate from, that we are more important than, that we are special. And all of the stuff that you see going on out there, judging it is not important. In fact, when you judge another person or judge something else, you don't define it. You define yourself as someone who needs to judge. You can't define me by calling me a jerk or a fool. You only define yourself.
It's like if you could spend an hour a day in meditation. The great French philosopher and scientist Pascal said that all of man's troubles stem from his inability to sit quietly in a room alone. You sit quietly in a room alone and go within and discover that higher consciousness, whatever you want to call it, whether you call it God or soul or spirit or Louise, it doesn't make any difference what you label it. If you go within and discover that and spend time each day inside of yourself, just peacefully being there and asking the questions, how may I serve? And what is my purpose? And what can I do to make this life a better one? And how can I serve people rather than be victimized by them or victimizing anybody else? You find that developing that kind of a quiet, peaceful, serene mind is something that will allow you to process the whole world in a more peaceful way. And when you get to that point where you are aligning yourself spiritually, or you are aligning yourself with the invisible part of your humanity, the part that defies form, that doesn't begin and doesn't end, when you align yourself there, and that becomes your first priority, you start noticing that you don't get victimized as much. That as I am more peaceful and I send out more harmony and more love and more forgiveness and more kindness and more of all the things I've been talking about on this tape, if you send that out more, that's what you get back. If you send out hostility and pain and suffering and anger and wanting to make other people wrong and wanting to prove yourself all the time, if you send out that kind of energy from yourself, that's exactly what you're going to get back. Send out love, you'll get back love. Making the change from dominance to tolerance requires disciplining ego and listening to your sacred self. I'm speaking from personal experience in this matter, and it is one of the toughest assignments my higher self has presented me with. I have spent many years being dominated by my ego, and I have unwittingly made dominance and judgment rather than tolerance a cornerstone of my relating. My suggestions are all from my personal experience of transcending my ego-driven instincts. Making the transition from dominance to tolerance is especially difficult because the desire for ego satisfaction is so strong. To move toward the tolerance that your higher self encourages and away from your ego-driven need to control and judge, you will want to examine the qualities that sustain a tolerant approach to life. To become more tolerant and less controlled by your false self, start practicing being satisfied with what is. If someone you love acts meekly towards you, your ego wants that person to be more assertive. If that person is assertive, your ego then decides to dislike assertiveness. If you eat too much, you start thinking about how nice it would be to be thinner. If you go on a diet, and all of your thoughts then will be about food. If you stay at home for a long period, your ego starts telling you how nice it is to travel. Go on the road, and you start thinking about how nice it would be to stay home. You're in a relationship and begin to imagine it would be nicer to be uninvolved. You're not in a relationship, and you start wanting to be in one. Your children are running around the house, and you start thinking about escaping. You aren't at home, and your ego starts having you think about nothing but your children. If you identify with this kind of inner dialogue, rest assured that ego has temporarily separated you from your sacred self. In its ongoing program to convince you of your separateness, it needs to separate you from oneness with the center of your being. Then it can keep you in that state of trying to dominate and control others as a way of trying to achieve your inner balance and bliss. Trouble is, you cannot get there if you are separated from the awareness of your higher self. As you begin listening to your higher self in quiet and contemplative moments, you begin relaxing and taking the pressure off. You stop the false thinking that everyone in your life needs to be dominated or controlled by you, or that others must live up to your expectations for you to be happy. People are the way they are, and your need to dominate or change them in any way is the edict of your false self. Your ego is, as usual, trying to convince you of your separateness. It also doesn't want you to catch on to how it is controlling your life, so it convinces you that if you don't dominate others, they will get the best of you. Your higher self has absolutely no need to dominate anyone or anything. This is the ticket to freedom. Right now, though, in this very moment, your ego is working to convince you that the higher self and tolerance are ridiculous ideas. Ego will argue that tolerance means permitting criminal behavior and health and social problems. Its favorite example is that it would mean permitting the Hitlers of the world to commit atrocities while we tolerantly look on. Your higher self can see beyond this logic, so of course you can too, if you are willing. When Mother Teresa was asked if she would march against the war in Vietnam, she replied, "No, but if you have a march for peace, I'll be there." When you become peaceful within, that is what you will have to give away. When you are dominated by your ego, you dominate others. If there is no inner harmony, there is no outer harmony. Ego needs the illusion of enemies in order to control you. When you are controlling others, it is because you have permitted ego to be in control. The paradox here is that you will affect the world in the ways that you wish when you cease trying to improve conditions with intolerance and judgment. It is only when you are not controlled by ego that you can choose to not control others. What you believed was power when you dominated others was actually the external activity of ego controlling you. Your impact on the world at large begins with the smaller world of yourself. You will foster freedom and peace when you are free of ego's control and know the peace of your higher self traveling the path of the sacred quest. One of the first steps along your path is learning tolerance by practicing seeing the world as it is, rather than as you demand it to be. These, then, are some of the ways that the ego attempts to rule our lives. Our goal in knowing our sacred self is to have the higher identities triumph over our lower identities. Essentially, your higher self wants you to be at peace. It wants you to know truth. It no longer needs you to dominate others. It is a very peaceful, loving place to be.
And this doesn't mean that you go through life being wishy-washy and being abused and so on. What you're doing is you're avoiding the abuse. Most of the abuse and the victimization and the stuff that haunts so many people in their lives comes from their need to be right and to make the other person wrong and to prove something. If you go in with a healthy self-esteem and a healthy view of who you are, and you know that God is with you and that divineness is something that you're bringing, and you've got help, you've got guidance there with you right there at every second, and you're going in with the purpose of making this a beautiful encounter rather than a contest of wills, and I'm going to be right and they're going to be wrong. There is no right and wrong in this. You find that that you just don't run into that. When Christ or when Buddha would go into a village, that they would raise the consciousness of the village just by their very presence. Your very presence as a divine soul around a situation that could erupt into something very violent, just your presence.
Here's what Saint Germain says about in the I Am discourses. The moment doubt begins to enter, more doubt rushes in. The same with the I Am. If you put your attention upon it, it rushes forth more and more. Where the conscious attention is fixed, there the energy pours. Dear ones, says Saint Germain, do you not see, when you want something revealed or to be inspired in some way, do you not see, I am that? The moment you say I am, you set in motion this power that has inherent within it all these faculties. It has all substance and must take on whatever form the attention of the mind is fixed on. The I am, the name of God, is the fathomless mind of God. In reaching for understanding, the average student is but contracting the recurring memory of that which has been, instead of going into the heart of God and bringing forth that which never has been. Individuals and students many times do not and will not realize that there have been many civilizations of vast attainments which are entirely unknown to the outer world today. Atlantis and Lemuria, or the land of Mu, as credited by a few today, are but fragments of the great civilizations that have been. Like, we get this idea that it's all now in this world that we're in and it never existed before. To do unusual things, the students who wish to do this take the determined stand, I am the heart of God, and I now bring forth ideas and accomplishments which it has never been brought forth before. Consider only, I am that which I wish to bring forth. The I am presence is the heart of God. You are immediately in the great silence the moment you say I am. If you recognize that you are the I am, that whatever you declare is manifest in that moment. So, when I think about why it is that people aren't able to create the kind of miracles that this group is going to be able to create after we disperse, it's that we have to make our number one relationship, our number one priority, the number one thing in my life. I was talking about this yesterday over and over again with people, with individual people, that my number one relationship in my life, at this point in my life, is my relationship to God, my relationship to my source. It's number one. It's above my relationship to my children. It's above my relationship to any of you, but people that I teach, to people, individuals in my life that I love. My number one relationship, and your number one relationship, needs to be this I am presence that is within you, that is within each and every one of us. And when you can do this, the reason people can't do it is because our identification is so strongly tied into what our senses have told us about our life. There is a place and a possibility that miraculous things can happen, but you have to, in order to banish the doubt, in order to heal this energy body that I'm speaking about here, you have to be in such a position that you're not asking. You're not coming from a ordinary place asking someone extraordinary to do something for you. That's sort of what we've learned in our religious model, that God is outside of us, something like a cosmic bellboy, that if we just sort of ask it to do something for us and we behave and we pay a certain amount of money and we go to the right temples and we do the right things, that this external being will then provide us with favors, and that this God has the ability to heal, but it withholds it depending upon what mood it's in and so on. And that's a very different concept that I'm talking about here. I'm talking about a concept of God that says that we are all pieces of God. Like T.S. Eliot said, we shall not cease from exploring. And at the end of all of our exploring will be to return to the place from which we originated and to know it for the first time, to know it. You don't have to die to do this. You can know it here. You can know it now. You can say to yourself, as the I Am discourses say over and over and over again, the I Am is the divine work of God. And you are capable of saying I am. And you don't want to add anything after I am that isn't consistent or harmonious or in rapport with God. That is the all-creating knowing, the all-knowingness. We all know everything. There's a higher self within each and every one of us. There's a highest self which is omniscient and omnipotent, all-powerful, and everywhere at once. If I have a simple tulip bulb in my hand, and I ask you to look at it and say, what is it? You'd say, well, it's just a grungy mass of biological matter. I say, but look at it more closely. And if it gets nurtured in a certain way, that is, it's watered and put in the ground, it will become a tulip bulb. Why? Because it has built into it a future pull. A future pull that you can't see or dissect or find in any lab. It has a future pull, a picture that is part of its DNA, part of its genetic inheritance. If you take a liver cell from your liver and look at it and dissect it, and it has a future pull, it will always be a liver cell. It will never be anything else. In order for you to be able to manifest magic, real magic in your life, miracles, you must first be able to conceive of it. You must be able to conceive of it, and that means no doubt. And the doubt comes by shifting to a knowing rather than a belief. All of this stuff, Deepak and I are talking now about taking a group, making a movie, and taking in this movie a group of babies that say 100 of them. And as they are born, we remove them from the environment that they're in, orphans and so on, children who are to be abandoned, and we place them into a world where there is no doubt, where they get past the lie. You know, we're led to believe a lie, as William Blake said in his wonderful poem, Songs of Innocence. He said, to see the world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower, to hold eternity in the palm of your hand and infinity in an hour, we are led to believe a lie when we see with, not through the eye, which was born in a night to perish in a night, when the soul slept
in beams of light. All of us are born in a night to perish in a night, in the physical world. But the soul, the spirit, resides and sleeps in formless beams of light. We are led to believe a lie, a huge lie. And the lie is that there are limitations in our life. Imagine these little children being raised in a world where doubt and impossible and can't do are never exposed to that. Anything that they can conceive of in their mind, they're able to practice. They go to fire putting out school, 101. And in fire putting out school, here's a fire over here, and you sit here, and you work on it with your mind. And you put that fire out. You know what my kids and I do after dinner? Many times after dinner in the evenings, a couple times a week, we go out and we put blankets on the grass. And in the blankets on the grass, we look up at the sky. And we kids say, I'm going to make clouds. Who wants to make clouds? I want to make clouds, Daddy. I want to make clouds. I'm going to make a rabbit. My kids, all the people in the neighborhood think that my kids are neurotic. Those Dyer kids think they can make clouds. Why not? The same intelligence that flows through them flows through the clouds. Why not shatter the illusion of your separateness and believe that? Imagine a whole curriculum, a whole world in which you were raised to know that there was no doubt. And you can transcend that doubt. And when you do, you begin to see that miracles, synchronicity become very much a part of your life.
That you have within you the power to not only trust in yourself and in this divine wisdom, and also that you are connected to it through being a part of the environment as well as the environment being a part of you, but to also know that there's an energy, there's a force that will be used to bring to you what it is that you seek. So some of the things that you can do to access this force and to begin to have things show up in your life through this energy is when you first wake up in the morning, ask yourself, how did the conditions of my life that I would like to change first come about? How can I facilitate making conscious contact with my unlimited, invisible source of energy? In other words, stop just seeing yourself as someone that is separate from all of the things that have happened in your life and recognize that there is something that you have been doing to manifest everything that's in your life already. It didn't just happen. Somehow, in some perhaps mysterious way, all that has showed up in your life showed up because of your own inner world and how you connected to it. So just look around and ask yourself, how did this spouse show up? How about these children? How about this furniture that I have? How about this job that I'm in? All of these things, what role did I play in this? Was this just a fortuitous accident of nature, or am I collaborating in some way that I don't quite understand with the forces of nature that bring things to me? And then begin to take some responsibility for it. Secondly, I would explore the possibility that perhaps the reason you believe that life is limiting is because you've assumed limitation to be in your life. If you don't assume there are any limitations in your life, then those limitations begin to go away. And all of the limitations that you experience and see in your world are really that which is in the physical world. There are only limits in the physical plane, in the right-hand side of the room, as I put it. All of the stuff that you see. Yes, there are beginnings and ends to all of that as our senses perceive them. But in fact, that's really not who we are. Who we truly are, that divine being that is in all things, is unlimited. And when we can give up our forfeiture of our ability to get into that world, we also give up the world of limitations. Whatever picture you are able to create mentally will assist you in knowing that the creative energy is flowing through you. So work on these pictures that you have and make sure that the inner pictures you have of what it is you would like to have, these visualizations, are working with you rather than against you. When you are able to internally picture yourself cooperating with the divine intelligence, it will cooperate with you. If you can't picture this for yourself, if you can't get that inner picture, then you will manifest whatever it is that you are picturing, which is doubt. Another thing that I would remind myself is to never limit the spirit in any way. Talk to your spirit. Talk to this divine intelligence that is you, that is even giving you the power to talk in the first place and to think. And tell the spirit what you want without telling it how you want it to happen. Then retreat in faith and trust. Also, I would keep your mental picturing to yourself. Keep it secret. Keep it private. What you want to attract is between you and God. And the moment that you need to prove it or you need to share it, you take the energy away from its accomplishment and onto the reactions of others. Another thing to do here is to examine all of the supposed lacks and scarcities in your life. Then remind yourself, I created all of this with my thoughts and my conditioning and my beliefs and my actions of my past. Taking responsibility for all that has shown up in your life is the way to transcend the things that you no longer want to show up. Also remember that what you think about is what you become. The great secret of the universe. The strangest secret, as my friend Earl Nightingale used to say. What you think about is what you become, what you think about all day long. Be conscious of every thought or every picture that ends up in your head, because that's what you will manifest in your life. And if you're doubting that, then you will manifest the doubt. And finally, I would recommend that you begin to act as if what you really want to attract to your life is already here, because it couldn't be anyplace else. Everything that's in the universe is already here. You don't create anything, you just redistribute, and you just attract that which is already here to your life. And so, if you are acting as if what you want is already here, if you're thinking you'd like to have health, then you start thinking that I'm healthy. If you think that you'd like to have a divine soulmate show up in your life, you act as if that person is there. And you begin to have conversations with that person and expect that person to show up. If you have inner views about attracting prosperity for yourself, then you begin to act prosperous. You go to places where people who live prosperously are hanging out. You walk around car dealerships that reflect this kind of consciousness. You always act as if what you want is already here. It just hasn't aligned yet with your intention. And that's what manifesting is, the alignment of your intention with divine purpose.
Everything in this universe is energy. That energy doesn't come in good and bad. It comes in high and low. It comes in fast and slow. That the energy that we live with and breathe with and is surrounding us at all times is really much more in our control or even in our ability to change than we have been conditioned to believe in our lives. In fact, energy and energy medicine and the idea of energy is a whole new world of investigation. And that there are certain principles, there are certain ways of living, and certain things that we can do that can help to bring our energy into the higher and faster energies. The slower energies will calibrate to make us weaker. The slowest of them are shame and fear, self-doubt, anxiety, depression, and so on. And that each time we have a thought, which is the source of our energy, of any one of these kinds of lower and slower vibrations, that we impact our bodies, our environment, our families, and ultimately our universe. So that we almost have an obligation not to think depressing thoughts. Not only because it will impact us negatively in our physical bodies, but because it will literally impact all of those around us as well. And as we become very conscious of our thoughts and the fact that they represent an energy and they can result in our being weaker or stronger, we can become conscious of how quickly we can shift those energies and how easy it is rather than how difficult it is to make those shifts. In an instant, you can utilize something like japa, the repetition of the sound of the name of God, in the moment of stress or anxiety or fear or shame. You can use that no matter how much your ego and the part of you that demands that you be right insists that you not do this. You can literally just do this for a minute or two or three and shift it and find that it disappears. I want to show you this map of human consciousness. Map of human consciousness goes from a frequency that he has created called 1 to 1,000. And the lower the frequency, that is the slower the vibration, the more it will keep you weak. And anything below 200, by his formulation after 29 years of study, anything that calculates or vibrates or calibrates lower than 200 will weaken you. It will take away your strength. And anything above 200, up to as high as 1,000, will empower you. So below 200 is force, above it is empowerment. The lowest level in this map of consciousness is called shame. That when you are experiencing a shameful thought, you will weaken yourself. The next up is guilt. The next up is apathy. All of these will weaken you. The next is grief. Grief itself, even though there's a lot of people making a strong case for it, to grieve is to weaken yourself. Fear, which has as its emotional counterpart anxiety. Craving, or ultimate desire. Anger, and pride, which is scorn and hate, are all going to weaken you. Now, the ones that will strengthen you, starting from the lowest ones that will strengthen you, that calibrate at 250 and above, are neutrality, which has an emotional correlate of trust, and then willingness, that calibrates at 310, and that's optimism, and then acceptance, which is forgiveness in the emotional realm, is 350. Reason and understanding calibrate at 400. Love and reverence at 500. Joy at 540, and serenity. And finally, peace at 600 is the highest that most of us will ever reach. Peace and bliss will always empower you. Now, I'm just talking about thoughts here, just thoughts of peace and bliss. Whereas the highest one, enlightenment, which is the emotion of ineffability, calibrates between 700 and 1,000 when you're out there athletically competing. That if your energy or your attention is on force, that is on being able to defeat your opponent, you will always calibrate weaker. It will make you weaker. When your emphasis is on defeating someone else or trying to overcome them, and they can measure what thoughts you have, and when they're on that, you will become weaker and you will perform at a lower level. But when you put your energy and your attention on performing at the most empowering level that you are capable of performing at, and using your God-given abilities and talents to just allow yourself to go out there and connect at the spiritual level and perform, you will always perform at a higher level, and you will calibrate strong rather than weak.
And this principle of contemplation is so intriguing to me. How many times I have said to my children, contemplate yourselves surrounded by the conditions which you intend to produce. You get what you think about, whether you want it or not. This thing that we call our thoughts is really the highest place within us, and we can use them to be thoughts that are aligned and think like God thinks, or we can use them as excuses and misalign ourselves and remind ourselves that God doesn't need any excuses. And so as you think of yourself as a God-realized being, you won't be doing that either. Contemplation is the continuous use of your thought process. How you use your thought process to train your mind in a new way. Remember, we are training ourselves in this seminar to elevate our concept of ourselves to a place that matches what it is that we would like to live out and attract and be in our lives. That's what we're doing. We're shifting our conception of ourselves and beginning to see ourselves as pieces of God from which we can never be disconnected. Secondly, your thoughts are actually like things that act to begin the process of materialization. So that what you think about ultimately becomes what you become and what becomes of you. If you contemplate with thoughts that match originating spirit, which is Thomas Troward's word for God, if you contemplate with thoughts that match originating spirit, then you will have the same power as originating spirit. That's an alarming thing to think and say. As you begin to contemplate in the same way that the creative force of the universe contemplates, then what you do is you shift out of your excuse pattern of things can't happen and won't happen into I am thinking in such a way that originating spirit thinks, and therefore if I continue to stay there, I will have the same power as originating spirit. Because you are originating spirit. You can't be separated from it. When contemplation is a vibrational match to originating spirit, you gain the cooperation of divine mind, attracting and fulfilling your desires. Let me say it again. When contemplation is a vibrational match to originating spirit, and everything is vibration, every thought is vibration, you gain the cooperation of divine mind, attracting and fulfilling your desires. Contemplation, next, is therefore a kind of action in and of itself, which sets into motion all of the creative forces of the universe. You want to set into motion the energy that will allow you to attract into your life what you want. You want to be not thinking about a BMW in your driveway or a new Rolex on your arm. You want to be thinking like God thinks and living from those cardinal virtues, and recognize that you do not attract into this world what you want. You attract what you are. And as you become it and it becomes you, it becomes limitless. And a BMW makes no difference. When you rely on excuses, you allow your false self, the ego, to contemplate what you do not want or what you cannot have. Do you get that? When you rely on excuses, you give evidence that you contemplate what you can't have or what you don't want. Every time you come up with a reason why you can't do something or you can't have something, you are giving evidence that you are contemplating in a way that is not aligned with originating spirit. Therefore, you lose the power of originating spirit. Return to the ego. Every excuse you ever use for anything is evidence that you're contemplating what you can't have. Now, why you would want to contemplate what you can't have or what's missing in your life is a meme handed to you, because basically you've been taught you're not worthy of all of that. God is worthy of that. You're not God. There's nothing more blasphemous than saying you are God, except we've been saying it here a lot. The presence of excuses in your life is evidence that you contemplate what you can't have or can't do, rather than the infinite possibilities that are inherent in your divine self. That everything in the universe is energy. And energy doesn't come in good and bad, and it doesn't come in right and wrong. It comes in high and low, and it comes in fast and slow. And that very quickly and very simply, energy moves from low to high. And that energy moves like the world of the solid, which we think of as stationary, is really nothing more than energy that has been slowed down so that it vibrates approximately to the frequency of your
senses. So that the reason that your hand appears to be solid is not because it's solid at all, but because your eyes, which observe it, are vibrating at approximately the same frequency as that which you are observing. Because you know that if you take your hand and put it under a microscope and turn up the magnification, you're going to see a dance. And the more magnification you get, the more dance of particles that you get. First you'll get molecules, then you take a molecular microscope and you turn that up, and you see inside the molecules there are atoms. You take an atomic microscope and you turn up the magnification, and inside the atoms of this thing called your hand, there are electrons and neutrons and protons and so on. Then you turn up the magnification on the electron microscope, and you find that there are subatomic particles. And then you turn up the magnification further on these quarks, and you find out that they're tinier particles. And until you put them in a particle accelerator, these tiniest particles, and you ram them together at 250,000 miles an hour until they collide, and then you open up the particle accelerator and you look inside and you discover there are no particles, that everything is just energy. And it goes back to what St. Paul said, that which is seen hath not come from that which doth appear. That everything in the universe is just energy, and it's just everything is moving, but some things move faster than others. So that the world of the solid is a very slowed down energy. It's just energy that's been slowed down. It approximates the frequency at which your eyes and your ears are processing and picking up things. And then you move to a faster energy, which is the energy of sound. And the energy of sound is nothing more than sound waves that are out there. We can't see them, we can't get a hold of them, but you just take an oscilloscope and an audiologist and you can pick up the sounds, and the sound energy just goes high, and it goes low, and it goes fast, and it goes slow, but it doesn't come in problems. There are no problems in what you hear or what you see. There's only energy moving fast and slow, high and low. It only becomes a problem when you process it in a certain way. And then we move to a faster energy, the energy of light, which moves faster than the energy of sound. And then we move to the energy of thoughts, and every thought that we have has an energy. And in a wonderful book called Power versus Force, Dr. David Hawkins has elaborated a system called a map of consciousness, in which they identify every thought that we have and its energy component. So that lower energy, that a thought of shame, for example, and a thought of hate, and a thought of fear, and a thought of stress, and any of these kinds of lower energy thoughts are thoughts that weaken us. And I'll talk more about these in the last principle in this program, the 10th principle. And then we get to looking at what thoughts and what energy they have, and why would I have certain thoughts if they weaken us, until ultimately we get to the fastest and the highest energy in the universe, which is the theory upon which a spiritual solution to every problem is based, the notion that spiritual energy is the fastest energy in the universe. And that when we bring the energy of spirit to the presence of the energy of problems, because all of our problems show up in the world of form, in the world of the solid. That's where we have them. And when we can bring spiritual energy to the presence of spirit, or to the presence of form rather, we nullify that. So that if you're in a dark room and someone brings a candle into that room, what is happening is that you don't have to announce to the darkness, you'd better dissolve now, you're going to have to get out of here because I'm bringing light in here. Darkness, rather, cannot survive when light is brought into a room, because light is a faster energy than darkness. And it's a metaphor for the prayer of St. Francis. Where there is hatred, if I can bring love to the presence of hatred, hatred cannot survive. And it was the message of the greatest spiritual teachers who ever walked among us, and all religious practices are based upon this idea of bringing higher and faster energy to the presence of lower and slower energy. And when we do that, we dissolve and nullify it and make it impossible for it to exist. So that if we can think and change around the energy of our thoughts, and in Power versus Force, Hawkins speaks about how to go about doing that in ways that I consider to be brilliant.
You know, they say that when Christ would go into a village, just his presence in the village would raise the consciousness of those around him. Just his presence in the village. Just the presence of Mother Teresa in a room, this 4'10", reasoned little old lady who ministers to the poor in Calcutta and describes it as doing the work of Jesus in all of his distressing disguises. Seeing Jesus in all of his distressing disguises is how she described it. That kind of consciousness permeates out. And we can have that when we shift our attention away from what is wrong and the hatred in the world. I mean, I get asked that question over and over again, yes, but what about this? And yes, but what about that? I say, I send out loving energy to every person I see on the street. I don't care what they look like. It doesn't make any difference whether they're clerks or whether they're waiters or whether they're people who walk by and smell bad or whatever. I look at them and I see the unfolding of God in every one of them. That is my challenge. To be able to do that and send it. And when you do, you impact not just that person and yourself, but the whole consciousness of the world.
Every book of the Bible has been calibrated. All of the great songs have been calibrated. The calibration goes like this. Over here to my left is a calibration of 0. And as far as I can go on this stage, let's say up to the speaker, represents 1,000. The energy level of 1,000 to here. All right? Now, anything that goes up to number 200 on this scale that I'm just arbitrarily giving to you, let's say 200 is right here, represents something called force. And every thought and every emotion that you have that calibrates between 0 and 200 is a thought or an emotion that weakens you in one way or another and lowers the energy field. And those calibrations, those thoughts, I'll give you the number 20 is the lowest, and the thought is shame. And this, by the way, is a 29-year study that was conducted over almost his entire professional lifetime. This is a medical doctor and a PhD researcher as well. At 30, we're moving up now. 30 is guilt, 50 is apathy, grief, fear, desire, anger, until we reach approximately 200. Now, every energy that is below 200 is an energy that when you have that thought, the thoughts of humiliation, of blame, of despair, of anxiety, of hatred, of scorn, any of these kinds of thoughts, these thoughts are in what he calls force. And whenever you use force as a way of communicating, a way of talking, a way of being, you create, the problem is that we create a counterforce. And that people who calibrate below 200 in their lives, and anyone can be calibrated at any time. Even photographs can be calibrated. The photograph on the cover of A Spiritual Solution to Every Problem calibrates around 580. And it was a picture that was taken in Assisi after just an astonishing miracle had happened in my life. You have to, it's almost like I said yesterday, you have to willingly suspend your disbelief. You have to do a somersault into the inconceivable and allow yourself to open up to the possibility that every thought that you have and every emotion that you have and every internal experience that you have has an impact not only on you, but as I'll demonstrate to you in a few moments, on everyone that you encounter in your life and everything that you encounter in your life and whatever energy field that you radiate to. So we're talking 0 to 200, but this scale isn't a scale that is consistent all the way through. When you get to a number of 600, which represents extremely high energy, you were talking about maybe a few thousand people on the entire planet, Earth, today, out of the 6 billion or so of us who reach this level of consciousness of 600. When we're talking about moving into 7 and 800, we're talking about the greatest spiritual masters who've ever walked among us. People who live at the level of the ineffable, who are unconditional love, and have what Patanjali says, he said, when you become steadfast in your abstention of thoughts of harm directed toward others, listen to that again, when you become steadfast in your thoughts of harm directed toward others, all living creatures will cease to feel enmity in your presence. If you're steadfast in abstaining from a thought of harm, and never ever have a thought of harm or judgment directed toward others, because you have to know that when you judge another, you do not define them. You define yourself as someone who needs to judge. Calling someone else stupid or foolish or evil or whatever does not make them that. That just says something about you who needs to put those kind of labels on other people. So that if you can become steadfast and become an individual who never, but never has a thought of harm directed toward others or judgment, which is almost impossible for all of us who live at these ego levels that we've been conditioned to live at. But if you can conceive of yourself as being someone like that, all living creatures will cease to feel enmity in your presence. St. Francis of Assisi is someone who calibrated in the 900s. Maybe 7 or 8 people in the history of the world have calibrated above 950. Francesco's, in fact, the city just to the north of us, about 40 miles, was named after this little man, St. Francis, who left his worldly belongings behind and just took out to save the church. And he spent the last 2 years of his life up in a place that I visited with my wife a few years ago when I took a group of people to Assisi at Mount Suribasso. And the last 2 years of his life, he had to have his hands and his feet and his side bound so that he didn't bleed to death. Such was the energy level of this being. Hawkins suggests that any person who calibrates at 600 or higher, Mother Teresa calibrated at 600. When Mother Teresa walked into a radio studio where I was on the radio that morning, everyone in the room felt her presence. She weighed about 90 pounds. It's about 4'10". And she radiated out a different kind of an energy. And he suggests in Power versus Force, with his academic and research background, that anyone who can raise their calibration level to the level of 600 or higher, everyone in that energy field is automatically healed. Disease cannot survive when you are around that kind of energy. They said of Jesus, his presence in the village and nothing more would raise the consciousness of those around him. He suggests that only one person in the history of humanity has ever reached this level of 1,000, and that was Jesus of Nazareth.